She was there one moment, and then she was gone. No struggle, no signs of forced entry, no calls for help, just an untouched apartment, a half-eaten meal on the counter, and a phone left behind as if she had only stepped away for a moment, but never returned. Clara Reynolds was 25 years old when she disappeared from her home on a quiet October evening in 2013. An aspiring journalist with a sharp mind and an insatiable curiosity, she had been chasing a story, one that, according to those closest to her, had begun to consume her in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Her case confounded investigators. There was no evidence of foul play, no known enemies, no logical explanation for why a young woman with everything ahead of her would simply vanish. And yet, despite endless searches, sleepless nights, and a family left clinging to fading hope, there was nothing, no trace, no answers, just silence. For 10 years, Clara Reynolds was considered gone, until last week. A letter arrived at the Reynolds family home, addressed in her handwriting. The ink was fresh, the paper crisp, but the date scrawled across the top? October 12th, 2013, the very night she disappeared. Inside, just a handful of words: "I never left." When the letter arrived, it sent shockwaves through the Reynolds family. A decade had passed since Clara's disappearance. 10 long years of unanswered questions, sleepless nights, and the quiet, unspoken grief that comes when hope fades into acceptance. Her parents had long since stopped expecting closure. Her brother, Michael, had spent years chasing leads that went nowhere, staring at missing persons reports that all told the same story. Clara Reynolds had vanished without a trace. But now, sitting on their dining table, was something that shouldn't exist. A letter written in Clara's own hand, postmarked just days before, but dated the very night she went missing. The ink was still bold, untouched by time, the paper crisp and clean. It wasn't something found in an old storage box, nor a forgotten relic misplaced for years. It was new. There was no return address, no explanation, just 7 simple words that raised more questions than they answered. "I never left. The walls breathe here." The words sent chills through Michael. He knew Clara's handwriting better than anyone. He had spent years poring over her old notes, her unfinished articles, the scribbled thoughts she left in the margins of her notebooks. This wasn't a forgery. It was her. Somehow, impossibly, it was her. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Underneath the short message scrawled faintly at the bottom of the page, almost as if it had been added in haste, was a final plea. "Don't come looking for me." This letter was more than just a mystery. It was an invitation, one that Michael knew he couldn't ignore. If Clara was still out there, if she was reaching out after all this time, then something had kept her from coming home. Something had held her captive, stopped her from escaping, forced her to remain silent for a decade. And whatever it was, it had finally let her speak. And so, 10 years after his sister vanished, Michael Reynolds decided to retrace her steps, to go back to the place where it all began, to follow the trail she left behind. But the deeper he looked, the more he began to realize. Clara had never truly been alone that night. A whisper in the distance, just on the edge of hearing. A name, distorted, stretched. Michael. And so the search for Clara Reynolds began once more. Michael Reynolds hadn't been back to Oak Ridge in years, not since Clara vanished. Not since the search teams combed through the dense forests, the empty parking lot, the decaying remnants of what used to be the Oak Ridge Hotel. Back then, he was just a desperate brother, clinging to any hope that the next search, the next clue, the next call from the police would bring his sister home. But the years had only brought silence, a cold, suffocating silence that stretched through the days and settled in the empty spaces Clara once filled. Now, standing at the edge of that same lot, staring at the ruins of the place that swallowed her whole, he realized something he had never admitted to himself before. He wasn't just searching for Clara anymore. He was searching for the truth. The sound of a paper rustling, the letter again unfolding. Michael reading it aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never left. The walls breathe here. Don't come looking for me." The Oak Ridge Hotel had been abandoned for nearly 2 decades, left to rot after a string of bizarre incidents led to its closure. Officially, it had been a simple case of financial collapse, mismanagement, and decay. But the locals told a different story. They spoke of visitors who checked in but never checked out. Employees who left in the middle of their shifts, refusing to explain why they would never return. Strange noises from the upper floors, where the walls seemed to shift in the dead of night. Clara had been investigating these stories before she vanished. Her notes, recovered from her apartment, were filled with details. Interviews with former staff, sketches of the building's layout, frantic scribbles about something she had found there. The mirrors aren't mirrors. The rooms move when no one is looking. Time doesn't work here. The last known footsteps of Clara Reynolds. The faint beep of a police recording. A voice, distorted by the passage of time, crackles through an old speaker. Police dispatch recording. Dated 2013 booms. 911. What's your emergency? A long silence, then a faint, shaky breath. A woman's voice, Clara's, low, whispering. I think I'm being followed. Ma'am, what's your location? I don't know. I was just at the front desk, but now the hallway is different. The doors aren't in the same place. I swear I just saw... The call abruptly cuts off. That was the last anyone ever heard from Clara Reynolds. Her phone was later found outside the hotel, placed neatly on the hood of her car. The screen was cracked. The call history wiped. But there was one thing investigators couldn't explain. The vehicle had been locked from the inside. Clara had never left the hotel. She had never even made it back to her car. Michael knew he wasn't the first to return here. Others had tried before him. Urban explorers, ghost hunters, journalists looking to dig up old stories. But they all said the same thing. The building doesn't want you to leave. The stories varied. Some spoke of hallways that led nowhere, doors that opened into places that shouldn't exist. Others claimed they saw figures in the windows, shadows that moved when no one was inside. But one thing remained consistent. No one stayed after dark. Then why did Clara? The last time Clara Reynolds was seen, she had walked through this very doorway. The front desk, abandoned. The guest book frozen on a single name. The last person to sign in before the hotel was shuttered. The timestamp, October 12th, 2013. The ink, faded but unmistakable. Clara Reynolds. No one had signed in after her. According to Clara's notes, she had booked a single room that night. Room 306, 3rd floor, left wing. It was the only room still available, though the hotel had long been abandoned. She had written about it in her journal, describing how the concierge had hesitated before giving her the key, how his hands had trembled, how he had muttered something under his breath before she turned away. They always leave by morning. No one stays. The front desk records confirmed it. Every guest who had ever checked into room 306 left before sunrise. And those who stayed later, they were never heard from again. No one had stayed here in 10 years. The police had searched it. Investigators had examined every inch. And yet, as Michael stepped inside, he found something no one had ever reported before. Clara's notebook. The pages flip faster now, handwriting frantic, uneven. A single line repeated over and over, scrawled in jagged ink. I never left. I never left. I never left. The sound of breathing, not Michael's. A shadow moves in the corner of the room. Michael's flashlight sweeps across the space. The bed is unmade, but the dust is disturbed, like someone had been there recently. The closet door, slightly open. The air, thick, unmoving. Then his beam catches something else, something the police report never mentioned. A mirror standing against the far wall. The glass is old, its surface warped, rippling. A handprint, small, delicate, pressed into the surface from the inside. Michael steps closer, his breath slow, careful. He raises a hand, pressing his palm against the glass. A pause. Then, his reflection doesn't move. The moment his skin touched the glass, the air in the room changed. The static hum returned, deeper now, vibrating in the walls. The reflection, his reflection, stared back at him, unblinking. And then, it smiled. Not Michael's smile, not his face, something else, something wearing him. A deep breath, a single word spoken in his voice, but not by him. Stay. A sharp crash. Michael stumbles back. The mirror shatters. Silence crashes down, thick and suffocating. And then, a whisper, so quiet it might be inside his own head. Michael. The sound of something moving behind him. Michael had spent years searching for answers, a decade of questions, dead ends and sleepless nights haunted by his sister's disappearance. But now, standing in the same room where she was last seen, the truth was closer than ever. A sound, a footstep behind him, soft, careful. But when he turns, nothing. Just the empty space where the mirror once stood. And then, the whisper returned. Michael. It wasn't just the sound of his name. It was the way it was said. The way it curled in the air, lingering, like someone was standing right behind him. Someone he should recognize. Someone who shouldn't be there. Michael turns to the room's only exit. The hallway beyond is longer now, stretching into unnatural darkness. The numbered doors along the walls flicker, changing digits, shifting between past and present. The wallpaper peels in places, revealing something beneath it. Writing scratched deep into the surface. Names, dates, words repeated over and over, desperate and uneven. Don't look. They see you. The doors change. Michael steps forward, his breath steady but measured. Then his foot brushes against something on the floor. Another piece of shattered glass, reflecting something. Not his own face. Not anymore. His sister. The reflection of Clara is not as he remembers her. Her eyes are wide, unblinking, lips slightly parted as if caught mid-sentence. Her hair is damp, clinging to her forehead. Her fingers twitch against the surface of the mirror as though trying to reach him. Michael had spent years picturing what had happened to Clara, wondering if she was taken, if she ran, if she had simply disappeared. But as he stared at the reflection, he realized something he never considered before. A single whisper from the glass, soft and pleading. Help me. Then a second voice, lower, jagged. Not Clara's. She's already here? The reflection shatters just as the lights cut out. The Oak Ridge Hotel was built in 1904, a luxury getaway for the wealthy. But long before it was a hotel, the land it stood on had a history, one that the newspapers never printed. There were reports from locals of strange figures seen in the woods long before construction began, workers disappearing during the build, a fire that claimed the lives of several guests in 1923, though no bodies were ever recovered. It was a place that consumed, and it never let go. A light flickers. The hallway is different now, narrower, more suffocating. The door to room 306 is gone, replaced by another, older door. The wood is splintered, warped with age. The handle, rusted and streaked with something dark. A decision. Leave or open the door. Michael steps forward. He turns the handle. The door creaks open. Beyond the door is not another hallway. It is a room, one that does not belong in any blueprint, any hotel record. It is small, cramped, its ceiling too low. A single chair sits in the center, dust coating the floor in thick layers. And on the wall, in erratic, desperate writing, a sentence repeated over and over, scratched into the plaster. I never left." Michael steps inside. The door slams shut behind him. Clara's last known words were spoken on a 911 call, but as Michael looked around the room, at the writing covering every inch of the walls, he realized she had been speaking long after that call ended, a shuffle of movement behind him, not fast, not sudden, just patient. Michael turns, a figure standing in the corner, motionless, watching. A beat of silence, then the whisper, right next to his ear. "Michael, don't look." Something touches him, a light grip, gentle, familiar. A hand resting on his shoulder, cold. His breath stills, his pulse pounds in his ears, and then the fingers tighten. Michael gasps, yanking away, stumbling backward. His flashlight swings wildly, illuminating the room. But there is no one there, just shadows stretching across the walls, flickering in unnatural patterns. The walls felt closer now, the air heavier. Something was pressing in, shifting the space around him. The writings on the walls, scratches, frantic, began to change, as though fresh marks were being carved before his eyes. One sentence, scrawled over the rest, appearing in real time. "She's in the walls." The room shakes, a deep guttural groan from within the foundation, the sound of something waking up. Michael reaches for the door, but the handle twists under his grip, burning hot. The walls creak, shift. The air thickens. Something moves beneath the floorboards, slow and deliberate. He forces the door open, bursting back into the hallway, into the hotel. Only, it's not the hotel anymore. The corridors stretch, twisting into impossible angles. The lights flicker. The elevator is gone, the stairs endless. The place is shifting around him, swallowing him whole. And then, footsteps, running, not his own. Michael turns, his breath caught in his throat. A figure at the end of the hall. A woman, her hair hanging over her face, her body still, unmoving. And then, slowly, she tilts her head, just slightly. A voice, distorted, wrong, echoing from every wall at once. "It's time to check in." For a moment there was nothing. No hallway, no walls, no hotel. Just an endless black void stretching in every direction. And in that void, something waited. The sound of distant footsteps, slow, purposeful, growing closer. Michael wasn't sure if he was standing, floating, or simply suspended. There was no ground beneath him, yet he did not fall. He reached out, searching for anything solid, anything real, but his fingers met only emptiness. Then, a whisper, right next to his ear. "Michael, wake up!" A sudden rush of sound, air rushing back, lights flickering, a deep, guttural groan from the foundation of the building. And just like that, Michael is back. Back in the hallway, back in the Oak Ridge Hotel. But something is wrong. The hotel is different now. The once decayed wallpaper is pristine. The hallway brightly lit, as if the hotel had never been abandoned. The air is warm, filled with the distant hum of voices. Soft music plays from hidden speakers, elegant and welcoming. For the first time since arriving, Michael feels something unsettling. Not fear, not terror, familiarity. The Oak Ridge Hotel was alive again, as if the last 10 years had never passed, as if he had stepped through time itself. A sound, the distant ding of an elevator, the murmur of guests' conversations overlapping. A bellhop walks past him, not acknowledging his presence. He turns to call out, but stops, because the bellhop is not real. Not entirely. His face is wrong, blurred, like an old photograph fading at the edges. And then, as Michael watches, the man simply vanishes, dissolving into nothing. This was no longer the abandoned, haunted building he had entered. This was the hotel as it had once been. But something was off. The guests, pale figures in elegant clothing, moved in unnatural loops. their laughter too hollow, their faces indistinct. And then Michael saw her at the front desk, speaking to the concierge, smiling, laughing. Clara. Michael's breath catches. He steps forward, watching as his sister, alive, unchanged, leans over the desk, signing her name in the guest book. The ink fresh, wet. The date, October 12th, 2013. He was watching the past unfold before him, the very moment Clara checked in, the last moment before she disappeared forever. He moves closer, but the air between them distorts, warping like a heat wave. Clara doesn't see him, doesn't hear him. She laughs at something the concierge says, then takes the key from his hand. Room 306. She turns, begins walking toward the elevator. Michael tries to follow, but his feet won't move. He is stuck, frozen in place, helpless as his sister steps inside the elevator, the doors sliding shut behind her. And then, a voice from right beside him. "You can't change it." Michael spins. The concierge is staring at him now, his face clearer than the rest of the guests. His expression, not unkind, but knowing, as if he understands exactly why Michael is here, as if he has seen this play out before. "You can't change it," the man repeated. "You can only watch." Michael shakes his head. This wasn't right. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. He had come all this way. He had seen the letter. He had followed every clue. He had to stop it. He had to save her. He tries to move again, but now the hotel is changing. The guests flicker, their faces distorting, shifting between real and unreal. The walls groan, the chandeliers above swaying without wind. The past is slipping away, and so is he. A letter unfolding. A voice, Clara's voice, soft and distant, begins to read. "Michael, if you're reading this, it means you found the letter. It means you came looking for me. I don't know where I am, I don't know how long I've been here, but I know one thing. It doesn't want to let me go." Michael had spent 10 years searching for an answer, and in the end it had been waiting for him all along, hidden in that letter. Clara had never left the hotel. She had never been taken. She had never died. She was still there. The whisper returns, softer this time, more familiar. "Michael." He turns, and for the first time she is there. Clara, standing just a few feet away, eyes filled with something unspoken, pleading. But before he can say anything, before he can even move, she shakes her head, slowly, a single tear slipping down her cheek, and then the hotel collapses. When Michael woke, he was outside. The Oak Ridge Hotel was gone, not abandoned, not in ruins. Gone. The land where it had stood was empty, grass-covered, untouched, as if no building had ever been there. Authorities were baffled. They claimed there had never been a hotel at that location. No records, no foundation, nothing. But Michael knew better. And then there was the letter, still clutched in his hand. Real, tangible. The ink slightly smudged where his fingers had gripped it too tightly. Proof that everything had happened. Proof that Clara had tried to reach him. And at the very bottom of the letter, a final line had appeared. One that wasn't there before. "Michael, please don't come back." Clara Reynolds was never found. Official records list her as missing, presumed dead. But those who knew the legend of Oak Ridge Hotel whisper something else, that she was never meant to leave, that some places don't just take people, they keep them. What do you think happened to Clara? Was she trapped in time, lost in another reality, or was she never meant to leave at all? Let us know your theories in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more terrifying mysteries that may never be solved.